Behold, I come quickly. Hold that fast which thou hast, that no man take thy crown.
There's nothing quite like a surprise on Valentine's Day.
Let me hear you whisper that you love.
Love and four-part harmonies were in the air in a Colorado classroom on this Valentine's Day Eve as a barbershop quartet serenaded teacher Lauren Zeiker. The singing Valentine came courtesy of her husband Justin, one of many, many gifts that'll be exchanged on this holiday that's more popular and lucrative than ever.
Crazy. This is the Super Bowl of the flower business. It's the #1 busiest single delivery day in the entire year.
Rob Speichel of Lair's Flowers has been pointing towards February 14 since last summer when he ordered 100,000 roses just for this day.
We have roses from $39.95 to $150 for a dozen, depending on how big of a splash you want to make.
No question, Americans will generate a tidal wave of Valentine's Day business this year, says marketing expert Darren Duber-Smith.
It's important to the economy, it's important to the GDP, and it's important to a good percentage of the population.
Certainly important to businesses like Denver's Ritz-Carlton, where rooms have been booked for months. The Ritz also offers private indulgences, side-by-side couples massages complete with strawberries and champagne here in the spa.
Absolutely big business for restaurants, hotels, spas. People really look to splurge and impress their significant other this time of year.
Duber-Smith says America's marketing machine has now elevated Valentine's Day to the level of other major U.S. holidays with a little extra social pressure to participate and, yes, spend.
The idea is if you don't have a Valentine, if you're not involved, you're kind of excommunicated from the culture for a week.
Speichel says Valentine's Day has one advantage over other occasions.
It's love. What are you willing to pay for love? That's what this holiday is all about.
They're paying enough to give 17 Valentine quartets in the Denver area something to sing about. This classroom cameo was a success.
Well, it was definitely a surprise.
Love is in the air on this Valentine's Day, and this holiday is soaring. Hendrik Sabrandi, CCTV, Denver.
St. Valentine's Day is the world's holiday of love. Since the Bible states that God is love in 1 John chapter 4 verses 8 and 16, does he approve of the celebration of this day? Does he want his people, true Christians, partaking of the candy and cards, or any customs associated with this day? When God says he wants you to live life abundantly in John chapter 10 verse 10, does that include celebrating a festive, seemingly harmless holiday like Valentine's Day? The God who gives us everything we need, life, food, drink, the ability to think for ourselves, surely approves of St. Valentine's Day, the holiday for lovers to exchange gifts, right? Do not be so certain. Do not assume anything. Do not even take this video's word for it. Go to history books and encyclopedias. Go to the Bible. Then you will know the real truth behind St. Valentine's Day. And you will know what God expects you to do about it. Like Christmas, Easter, Halloween, New Year's and other holidays of this world, St. Valentine's Day is another attempt to whitewash perverted customs and observances of pagan gods and idols by Christianizing them. As innocent and harmless as St. Valentine's Day may appear, its traditions and customs originate from two of the most sexually perverted pagan festivals of ancient history, Lupercalia and the feast day of Juno Februata. Celebrated on February 15th, Lupercalia, known as the Festival of Sexual License, was held by the ancient Romans in honor of Lupercus, god of fertility and husbandry, protector of herds and crops, and a mighty hunter, especially of wolves. The Romans believed that Lupercus would protect Rome from roving bands of wolves, which devoured livestock and people. Assisted by Vestal virgins, The Luperci, male priests, conducted purification rites by sacrificing goats and a dog in the Lupercal cave on Palatine Hill, where the Romans believed the twins Romulus and Remus had been sheltered and nursed by a she-wolf before they eventually founded Rome. Clothed in loincloths made from sacrificed goats and smeared in their blood, the Luperci would run about Rome, striking women with fibrua, thongs made from skins of the sacrificed goats. The Luperci believed that the floggings purified women and guaranteed their fertility and ease of childbirth. February derives from februa, or means of purification. To the Romans, February was also sacred to Juno Febrata, the goddess of fevers, fever of love, and of women and marriage. On February 14th, billets, small pieces of paper, each of which had the name of a teenaged girl written on it, were put into a container. Teenaged boys would then choose one billet at random. The boy and the girl whose name was drawn would become a couple, joining in erotic games at feasts and parties celebrated throughout Rome. After the festival, they would remain sexual partners for the rest of the year. This custom was observed in the Roman Empire for centuries. In AD 494, Pope Gelasius renamed the festival of Juno Febrata as the Feast of the Purification of the Virgin Mary. The date of its observance was later changed from February 14th to February 2nd, then changed back to the 14. It is also known as Candlemas, the Presentation of the Lord, the Purification of the Blessed Virgin, and the Feast of the Presentation of Christ in the Temple. After Constantine had made the Roman Church's brand of Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire AD 325, church leaders wanted to do away with the pagan festivals of the people. Lupercalia was high on their list. But the Roman citizens thought otherwise. It was not until AD 496 that the church at Rome was able to do anything about Lupercalia. Powerless to get rid of it, Pope Gelasius instead changed it from February 15th to the 14th and called it St. Valentine's Day. It was named after one of that church's saints, who, in AD 270, was executed by the emperor for his beliefs. According to the Catholic Encyclopedia, at least 3 different St. Valentines, all of them martyrs, are mentioned in early martyrologies under the date of 14 February. One is described as a priest at Rome, another as bishop of Interamna, modern Terni, and these two seem both to have suffered in the second half of the 3rd century and to have been buried on the Flaminian Way, but at different distances from the city of the 3rd Saint Valentine, who suffered in Africa with a number of companions. Nothing is further known. Several biographies of different men named Valentine were merged into one official Saint Valentine. The church whitewashed Lupercalia even further. Instead of putting the names of girls into a box, the names of saints were drawn by both boys and girls. It was then each person's duty to emulate the life of the saint whose name he or she had drawn. This was Rome's vain attempt to whitewash a pagan observance by Christianizing it, which God has not given man the power or authority to do. Though the church at Rome had banned the sexual lottery, young men still practiced a much toned-down version, sending women whom they desired handwritten romantic messages containing St. Valentine's name. Over the centuries, St. Valentine's Day cards became popular, especially by the late 18th and early 19th centuries. These cards were painted with pictures of Cupid and hearts, and meticulously decorated with lace, silk or flowers. But who was the original Valentine? What does the name Valentine mean? Valentine comes from the Latin valentinus, which derives from valens, to be strong, powerful, mighty. The Bible describes a man with a similar title, and Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, wherefore it is says, even as Nimrod the mighty hunter before the Lord in Genesis chapter 10 verses 8 and 9. He was said to have hunted with bow and arrow. As mentioned, the Romans celebrated Lupercalia to honor the hunter god Lupercus. To the Greeks, from whom the Romans had copied most of their mythology, Lupercus was known as Pan, the god of light. The Phoenicians worshipped the same deity as Baal, the sun god. Baal was one of many names or titles for Nimrod, a mighty hunter, especially of wolves. He was also the founder and first lord of Babel in Genesis chapter 10 verses 10 through 12. Defying God, Nimrod was the originator of the Babylonian mystery religion, whose mythologies have been copied by the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans and a multitude of other ancient peoples. Under different names or titles, Pan, Lupercus, Saturn, Osiris, Nimrod is the strong man and hunter-warrior god of the ancients. But what does the heart symbol have to do with a day honoring Nimrod Valentine? The title Baal means lord or master, and is mentioned throughout the Bible as the god of pagans. God warned his people not to worship or even tolerate the ways of Baal Nimrod. In ancient Chaldean, the language of the Babylonians, Baal, which is similar to Baal, meant heart. This is where the Valentine heart symbol originated. Now notice the name Cupid. It comes from the Latin verb cupere, meaning to desire. Cupid was the son of Venus, Roman goddess of beauty and love. Also known as Eros in ancient Greece, he was the son of Aphrodite. According to myth, he was responsible for impregnating numerous goddesses and mortals. Cupid was a childlike archer. Remember, Nimrod was a skilled archer. Mythology describes Cupid as having both a cruel and happy personality. He would use his invisible arrows, tipped with gold, to strike unsuspecting men and women, causing them to fall madly in love. He did not do this for their benefit, but to drive them crazy with intense passion, to make their lives miserable, and to laugh at the results. Many of the gods of the Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, Assyrians and others were modeled after one man, Nimrod. But what does this have to do with us today? Why should we be concerned with what happened in the past? Read what God commands his people concerning pagan customs and traditions. Learn not the way of the heathen, for the customs of the people are vain. Jeremiah chapter 10 verses 2 and 3. Also notice Christ's words in Matthew 15:9. It is vain they do worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. Throughout the Bible, God describes heathens as those who worship things that he had created: animals, the sun, the moon, stars, trees, etc., or man-made idols, or anything but the one true God. He calls such people and their practices pagan. True Christians understand that God hates any customs, practices and traditions that are rooted in paganism. But just how serious is God about paganism? Just why does God hate anything that resembles pagan customs? Is it possible to whitewash or Christianize pagan practices and make them clean? Is it okay to practice pagan customs as long as you worship God? Notice what God says in Leviticus chapter 18. After rescuing Israel from slavery, God warned them not to practice the customs they had picked up in Egypt, or learn the ways, customs and traditions of the Gentile nations that they would encounter in the Promised Land verses 1 through 3. Instead, God commanded Israel to follow his ways verses 4 and 5. God then describes the pagan ways of these ungodly nations in great detail. In verses 7-20, he condemns all kinds of heterosexual sex relations that fall outside the holy boundaries of marriage: incest, fornication, adultery, etc. In verses 22 and 23, God condemns homosexuality and bestiality. Together, these sins break down and destroy the family unit that God had so lovingly created and instituted. Notice what God links to these perversions: and you shall not let any of your seed children pass through the fire to Molech, neither shall you profane the name of your God, I am the Lord. Verses 21. God ties in the perverse sexual practices of ungodly, pagan nations with human sacrifices, parents offering the lives of their children to pagan gods. St. Valentine's Day originates from the ancient paganism of the Satan-influenced world. It is designed to deceive mankind by appealing to fleshly, carnal desires, or, as the Bible calls them, the works of the flesh. Now the works of the flesh are manifest, made obvious, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, drunkenness, revelings, and such like Galatians chapter 5 verses 19 through 21. Do any of these sound like Lupercalia to you? Ultimately, they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. A true Christian is focused on God's soon-coming kingdom, Matthew chapter 6 verse 33, and the world to come, not on the fleshly cravings of this world. A true Christian must strive to put off the old man and actively imitate the perfect, righteous example of Jesus Christ. A Christian knows that he must actively come out of this world, out of its pagan-infested customs, practices and traditions. Christians do not celebrate St. Valentine's Day.
Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts.